I'm 83 years old, and for more than 50 years I have replayed a single moment in my mind. A hallway, white walls, bright lights, a doctor who wouldn't meet my eyes, and a question no one should ever be asked. My wife Eleanor was 27. She was laughing that morning, nervous, excited, holding my hand so tightly my fingers went numb. It was our first child. We had argued for months about names. She wanted something classic. I wanted something strong. We thought we had time for those arguments. We thought we had time for everything. The labor started normally. Nothing dramatic. Nurses moving in and out. Machines humming. Encouraging smiles. Then the room changed. You don't need medical knowledge to feel when something shifts. The smiles disappear first. Then the urgency creeps in. Voices lower. Movements sharpen. Suddenly, I wasn't part of the moment anymore. I was in the corner, watching. They rushed her into surgery. Someone told me to wait outside, and that's where the world narrowed to a bench and a ticking clock. Minutes stretch differently in hospitals. They don't pass. They press against you. After what felt like hours, a doctor came out. His face was composed, too composed. He said there were complications, severe ones. They were losing her, and the baby was in distress. They could try to save one with a higher probability, but not both. I remember thinking, this is a mistake. These things don't happen to ordinary people. We weren't special. We weren't reckless. We were just starting. Then he actually asked me, if we have to prioritize, who do we focus on? There are moments in life when your brain shuts down to protect you. This was not one of them. I was fully aware, painfully aware. I thought about my wife, her laugh, the way she rested her head on my shoulder when she was tired, the way she spoke to our unborn child at night. And then I thought about the baby, the life that hadn't begun yet, the future, the possibility. I don't know how long I stood there. I don't know what expression was on my face. I only remember the sentence I said, "Save the baby." I told myself it was logical. She would have wanted that. She loved that child already. We had talked about it. We had said, if anything ever happened, we thought we were being philosophical, not practical. They went back into the room. The door closed. And in that moment, I became the man who made the decision. An hour later, a nurse placed my son in my arms. He was alive, crying, strong, warm, and behind her there was silence. No one needed to explain. You can feel absence when it enters a room. They told me they had done everything they could, that sometimes these things just happen, that I had done the right thing. People always say that. They need you to believe it. I looked at my son, and for the first time in my life, joy and grief occupied the same space. It felt wrong. It felt like I had traded something sacred. For years, I told myself I had honored her, that I had chosen the future she would have wanted, that I had done what any good father would do. I repeated that story so often, I almost believed it. But there's something about time. It strips away the stories you use to survive and leaves only the truth. They sent me home 3 days later with a newborn and no wife. The house felt wrong the moment I opened the door. Her shoes were still by the entrance, a half-folded blanket on the couch, a cup in the sink she never finished. You don't realize how much of a person exists in a space until they're gone. Silence is not empty, it's heavy. That first night, my son wouldn't stop crying. I held him in my arms, walking back and forth in the living room at 3 a.m. I remember looking at him and thinking something I've never said out loud until now. If she were here, she would know what to do. I didn't. I was 30 years old and suddenly responsible for a life I had chosen over another. People visited, they brought food, they hugged me, they told me I was strong. They said things like, "You did what she would have wanted." No one asked me how it felt to have been the one who decided. They didn't want the answer, neither did I. Raising him alone wasn't heroic, it was exhausting. I learned how to braid tiny pieces of responsibility into daily survival, feeding, bathing, working, trying not to fall apart when the house grew quiet at night. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes from parenting without your partner. You don't just miss them, you miss the shared witnessing, the look across the room when your child does something ridiculous, the silent agreement about how to handle a tantrum, the laughter at something only the two of you understand. I didn't just lose my wife. I lost the future version of us raising him together. He grew. Strong, bright, curious. He had her eyes. That was the hardest part. Every time he looked at me, I saw what I had lost and what I had saved. At the same time, when he was 4, he asked about her for the first time. "Where's Mommy?" I had rehearsed that conversation in my head 1,000 times, but nothing prepares you for a child asking a question that doesn't have a comforting answer. I told him she was very sick when he was born, that she loved him very much, that she gave everything so he could be here. That last sentence tasted strange in my mouth, because I wasn't entirely sure it was true. I had decided, not her. There were moments when I felt proud, when he took his first steps, when he learned to read, when he ran toward me after school. I was there, fully there, in ways I might not have been if she had survived. Grief sharpens presence. I never postponed time with him, never said later. I had learned what later could cost. But presence does not erase doubt, it amplifies it. Every birthday, I calculated something in my mind. If she had lived, he would have had both of us. If I had chosen differently, would I have been the one absent instead? That question never leaves, it just changes shape. When he was 13, we argued for the first time in a real way. Teenage anger, doors slamming, accusations. In the middle of it, he shouted something that stopped me cold. "You don't understand." And in that moment, I thought, he's right. There are parts of him I could never fully understand because I wasn't the one who carried him, because I wasn't the one whose body fought to bring him here, because I wasn't the one who might have made a different choice. He never blamed me, not once, but that almost made it worse, because forgiveness offered before accusation feels like something you don't deserve. When he turned 18, he found the old hospital documents. I had kept them in a box I never opened. He brought them to me quietly, sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and asked, "Did you have to choose?" There are questions that age you in seconds. I told him the truth. Yes. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he asked, "Why did you choose me?" I had prepared for that question for decades and I didn't have an answer that didn't hurt. I told him I thought it was what she would have wanted. He nodded, but something shifted. Not anger, not resentment, something more complicated. The understanding that his existence came at a cost. After that day, I noticed something subtle. He became careful with me, gentle, as if he carried a quiet guilt for something that wasn't his responsibility. I had saved him, but I had also given him a burden he never asked for. The knowledge that someone else did not walk out of that hospital because he did. He built a good life, a family, children, a career. He is a good man. I love him deeply. That has never been the question. The question has always been, did I have the right to decide whose life continued? Or did I choose the possibility of a future over the certainty of the woman I loved? You tell yourself survival justifies everything, but survival does not erase the weight of selection. Every anniversary of her death, I sit alone, not because I have no one, but because I remember the exact second I spoke those words. Save the baby. I can still hear my own voice, calm, firm, certain. It is terrifying how certain I sounded. And here's the truth no one prepares you for. You can love what you saved and still mourn what you surrendered for the rest of your life. I used to believe that time would soften it, that after enough years, the memory would dull, that repetition would make it easier to live with. It didn't. It simply became quieter, and quiet things can be the heaviest. My son is 53 now. He has children of his own. I've watched him hold his wife's hand in hospital rooms, watched him stand outside delivery doors, watch fear move across his face the same way it once moved across mine, and every time I relive that hallway, that bench, that ticking clock, there is something cruel about surviving long enough to see your decision echo in another generation. When his first child was born, everything went smoothly, but I still saw it in his eyes. The calculation, the awareness that life is fragile. Afterward, he hugged me longer than usual and whispered, "I can't imagine having to choose." Neither could I, until I did. As I grew older, people stopped talking about that night. It became history, a tragic beginning to a strong story. They saw a widowed father who did his best, a son who turned out well, a life that continued. From the outside, it looks complete, but completeness is not the same as peace. 3 years ago, my son came to visit me alone, no grandchildren, no distractions, just him. He sat in the same kitchen where he once asked me if I had to choose. We didn't talk about it directly at first. We talked about work, about his kids, about aging. Then he said something that shifted something inside me. He said, "Dad, I've always wondered something." He paused. "If she had survived, would you have been okay if I hadn't?" There it was, not anger, not accusation, curiosity, but beneath it, something else, a quiet awareness that his existence had once been weighed against someone else's. I didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, I allowed myself to think about it honestly. If the doctor had said the opposite, if they had said she had the better chance, would I have chosen differently? I don't know. And that is the truth that has haunted me. I don't know. For 50 years I told myself I chose him because it was right, because it honored her, because it protected the future. But sitting there across from my grown son, I realized something devastating. In that hallway, I wasn't choosing between two people. I was choosing between certainty and possibility. I knew my wife. I loved her. I had history with her. The baby was an idea, a promise, a hope, and I chose the hope. Hope feels noble in the moment. It feels forward-facing, courageous. But hope is abstract. Love is concrete, and I chose the abstract. That doesn't mean I regret my son. I need to say that clearly. He is not a mistake. He is not a burden. He is not something I would undo. He is the greatest love of my life after her. But love for him does not erase the cost. Two truths can exist at the same time. I am grateful for him, and I grieve her every day. After that conversation, my son stood up and came around the table. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said something I didn't expect. "I don't feel like I was chosen over her." He paused. "I feel like she paid for me." There is a difference, and that difference changed everything. For years, I thought I carried the guilt alone. I thought it was my burden, but that night I understood something deeper. He carries it too, not as blame, but as awareness. He lives knowing his life began in sacrifice, and that is not a light thing to carry. If I could go back to that hallway, would I choose differently? I don't know. And I have stopped trying to rewrite it, because life is not a moral equation you can solve cleanly. Sometimes it's just a moment you survive. What I do know is this: no one prepares you for the weight of being asked to decide who continues. No one tells you that survival can feel like theft. No one tells you that loving what remains does not cancel mourning what was lost. I have lived 53 years with that sentence. Save the baby. I have watched it grow into a man, into a father, into a good human being, and I have sat beside my wife's grave more times than I can count. Both realities exist. neither cancels the other. At 83, I don't pretend to have a lesson wrapped neatly in wisdom. I only have honesty. If you are ever asked to make a decision like that, understand this. There is no outcome without loss. There is no version of that night where something isn't taken and you will carry it. Not as punishment, but as memory. People think the hardest part was that night in the hospital. It wasn't. The hardest part was living well afterward, loving fully, parenting deeply, and still allowing myself to grieve without pretending I was certain. Certainty is a luxury we imagine we had. In truth, we just reacted. I am 83 now. My son is alive. My wife is not. And I have lived long enough to know that life does not reward the right choice. It only continues. You learn to live with what continues, and you honor what didn't.